I'll chat you. It's
Okay.
going on right now.
Welcome. This is the Open Center Facebook Live, and I am Manoy Araceli Brown, and I am your host for today. Now, just want to make sure if you are all new to us, this is the Open Center, a holistic center in New York City. We've been around for about 36 years, and currently we're working online and making plans for a great fall season. So please check our website out at www.opencenter.org and check out all our programs that are coming up, especially our new fall layout starting in September. And now I'd like to introduce the work of Tonita Gonzales and Rita Navarez Perez. Today we'll only be speaking with Tonita, and for this interview. Now, both of them work internationally as traditional curanderas or folk healers with clinics in Mexico City, as well as New Mexico, which is where Tonita is usually located. They co-founded the Cultura Cura, a nonprofit organization in Mexico. They also teach at the University of New Mexico here in the United States. And they also have taught at the Smithsonian, Texas Holocaust Museum, Pacifica College in LA, as well as hospitals. Rita is a professor of traditional medicine at Centro de Desarrollo Humano hacia la Comunidad, which is a very long thing to say, at Cuernavaca, Mexico. And they specialize in such things as sobadas, which are hands-on healing massages, limpias, energetic cleansings. There's also Mayan acupuncture, as well as cupping, which is, of course, you're very familiar with that type of healing work, which is mostly known in the Oriental teachings. And there's also pláticas, which is heart-to-heart talks, which is dealing more with the psychology of where we look at our emotions and how we think, which, if many people may remember, Elena Avila was a curandera or a folk healer many years ago. And she was a great teacher of that. And they also work with the Temazcal, which is a Mesoamerican sweat lodge. And they work with medicinal plants, foods, herbs. And I also want to make sure you get their website, which is Temazcalito, T-E-M-A-Z, CALITO.com. Actually, you know, I met you, Tonita and Rita, when Elena Avila took the Open Center students down to Mexico City because they were studying with her for a year here in New York. And it was a fantastic trip. And the students here were working with healers in the Mexican curandera tradition, or curandero tradition in Mexico City. So they also went to visit the pyramids. I think it was exciting, but it also quite life-changing for many people. And, you know, I want to also talk a little, I would like for you to let us know more about the extent and how this type of work, kurandarismo, covers the entire human condition, from prevention, chronic and acute illnesses, because I think it's kind of most likely not that well known, not as much as the Chinese tradition. And I think it's just as vast. Also, sometimes it's just attributed just to Mexico, but it also goes down to Central and South America. So because I, being a Central American, I knew about this at the age of 5, because I would hear words about la sobada. And basically it's a curandera who comes in and works on your abdomen if you have some sort of blockage. And it's very deep. Of course, there are midwives. There's a variety of them. So if you can expand on that for us, that would be great to hear about.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I am excited to be able to share this with different communities. I think probably the easiest place to start is with the word kurandarismo. And when we look at it in Spanish, the word curar means to heal. And so unfortunately, like many traditional medicines across the world, and it still happens today, people get misconstrued about what curanderismo is or what traditional medicine is. And for me, we really have to look at that word. So curar means to heal. So it's the same, you know, the healing arts, it's how do we heal? And when we look at it in that perspective, we're able to open that panorama, because a lot of times our medicine now is a mixture of allopathic, but we forget about culture and spirituality. So this is an incorporated way that I think we've been doing it from the beginning of times. It was what my grandparents, my grandmother taught me. It was something that was hand down. I sometimes will explain to people that curanderismo is a lifestyle. It is a change in the way we think. When we think of healing, we've kind of, especially in the US, been indoctrinated to think it's just about the body. And curanderismo is, yes, as much as the body is important, but it's your mind, it's your emotions, it's your spirituality. So we can't just treat an illness, and I use that word briefly because in curanderismo, and especially in Mexico, the word illness or evil didn't even exist. What we use a lot is the word ometeot, and ometeot is about the duality of who we are, the duality that we're all male, female, good, bad, of different cultures. And even when we look at it as far as like healing and medicine, it's actually a same mixture of both traditional and allopathic is where we find the optimum healing space that people need to be in when they're dealing with any type of imbalance, and that's body, mind, or spirit, correct? Especially in times like today that we're dealing with so many a variety of emotions, and we really need to get back to some of those ways. I give a good example sometimes of Atole. Atole is a cornmeal drink that we have, and it is not just about the properties, and sometimes we forget, and sometimes we see it even here in New Mexico that people would say, there's different words for it, but they would say it's like a poor man's food. And the reality, because it's basically just boiled cornmeal, but what we know, every time I was sick growing up, my grandmother was the first one knocking at my door with atole. And sometimes in New Mexico, we have the tradition of putting juniper ash in there. And what we know about indigenous science now, which I definitely was not taught growing up, it was just like, here's the medicine, is that a cup of atole equals like a calcium supplement. But also when you put ash, both the corn and the ash absorb toxins in your belly. So if you had the flu, you have any type of illness where you're having, you know, diarrhea or vomiting and your body's reacting, if you have a cup of atole, what it's doing is it's absorbing those toxins, it's absorbing the viruses and helping it push through your system. So it is very much the indigenous science of medicine, but it's also recognizing the second part of that is the prayer. When my grandmother was making atole, she was actually consciously praying that this bring medicine to the people that she give it to. And we have to kind of go back into looking at those traditions. I kind of am fascinated how we do this all online now. We have a great tradition here in New Mexico and throughout Latin America. In New Mexico, we call them matachinas, and it's a traditional dance since eons ago. A lot of them correspond to what we call in New Mexico penitentes. But now we see people doing the prayers online because of COVID. And what a beautiful way that more people, as we know that not everybody, especially from New Mexico, had those traditions, and they're living all over the country and the world. So us being able to talk about traditions, about medicine, about ancestral healing allows us to give everybody a little bit of hope so that they can go back into their multicultural or wherever they come from and study a little bit about their own healing. I think curanderismo is about empowerment. It's empowering people to be responsible for their own healing. I always give an example that the word doctor in Latin actually means teacher. And we've forgotten how to teach our patients, how to teach people to take care of themselves. So how to empower them to say, you know, there's a Dolores Huerta, you know, sí se puede, you know, you can do it, and people can heal themselves. And it's both in culture and spirituality, but it's also recognizing who your roots are. We all have a very deep connection with the earth. It was who we are every time we walk on the earth. She's the madre in many traditions, the mother. She has many names, Pachamama, Tonantzin. And what we have to recognize is that every human being has a divine right to heal. And I think, to be honest, that traditional medicine is a great way for us as communities, even to heal racial divides. And I say that because it's wonderful. I was teaching once in Minnesota, and there was people from about 13 different countries, and each person had a different name for a different plant, and you'll find that they're all using the plant in the same way. And so you bring in this camaraderie of indigenous science from all over the world that is similar. And the more that we can teach and be open, because the other times, when we look at colonization in medicine, the medicine went down, it went in hiding. People couldn't share it because they would be accused of, witchcraft or, being a heretic. And it's silly. And when we look at it, is everybody has a divine right to heal. Every community did their best because it was a sign of love, to show healing styles. And when we return to those roots, all of us as communities can learn to share, learn to see what are those medicines that are growing right outside the door that can help you in community. So it's a beautiful way of coming together. The other part that I think is amazing is it's intergenerational, right? A lot of times we've forgotten, we kind of go to Google before we go to our elders, before we go to our elder neighbors. And a lot of times I think some of the best healing happens is when you ask your elders. And if you're, sometimes we don't have elders here. So you learn to meet elders and you say, you know what did your grandma do when she had this? What did your grandma do in menopause? What did your grandma do when she had the flu? I was working with a good friend of mine in Africa, and she's a Kenoshan nun, and she kind of laughed at me because she had this growth on her cheek, and where they're at is in their missionary, they don't have access all the time to the internet. And she was quite amazed. And I said, here's what I need you to do is cut a piece of banana peeling. And every day, just put it under the Band-Aid, like on this growth that she had. And within about a week, I said, you're going to do that. And then after you take it off, start putting aloe on it. Within a week, it completely fell off. And she was, concerned it might be cancer. Why do I have this growth happening? And it was a simple, I had to think. I was researching some of the herbs that they had in the country she was at. And I thought, I'm sure they're in a tropical area. They probably have bananas, and it worked. And it's part of us remembering. It's remembering and reclaiming those beautiful traditions.
Wow, that's a fantastic first introduction to this work. You yourself must have experienced many healings that either you saw people work on. What kind of let's say illnesses have you experienced? Is it taking a long time? Has it been just in general something that takes a year, takes a week? That was a small example of what you've shown, but is it something like, for example, if I have a problem with, I don't know, let's say stomach or kidney or spleen or something like that, how would you address that?
Absolutely. You're right. It is because we look at healing as a multi-perspective way of looking at the body. I'll give it a good example. We look at people that deal with asthma. Let's just take the lungs, for example. If they're dealing with any type of asthma, bronchitis, COPD, any type of what they, the American system would label as a disease, where we really look at it.
Bless you.
Thank you. We really look at it as an imbalance as opposed to looking at it as a disease or a label. We really work on treating the symptoms as opposed to treating an illness, because when we can focus in a positive way as an imbalance on any gamut, even if it's somebody that had like heavy periods, there's an imbalance happening in their diet, in their well-being. So when we look at, say, for example, lungs, I'm not only going to look at the illness and like what is happening there, but I'm going to look at the emotions. So in indigenous medicine, and it's a common between both Ayurvedic, Chinese, Mashika medicine, indigenous medicine, the lungs are always where we hold grief. And it's part of our human condition, you know, if that's where everybody focuses that energy. And we logically know what that means, because when somebody's upset or somebody has a duelo, like we said in Spanish, their first thing is, right? They can't breathe. They'll come to you after a death and they said they feel this pain in their chest because of the anger. A lot of people have anger with grief. They build bile. They build this bile that gets set in their chest. They get angry. They can't breathe. So sometimes we'll deal with this preventatively. So we'll treat the family if somebody's dealing with grief, or they have a family member in hospice or working with a partera de alma, which is a midwife of souls that sometimes we as practitioners of traditional medicine are called to help the family. And I'll typically treat the entire family with teas that will support their lung health, because rather than waiting for the grief to deplete their energy, we're going to treat it before and in the midst of the pain. So that we don't have any long-term effects. But what that could look like is not only treating their breathing issues with herbs, but we can go, I sometimes will explain to people when we're teaching, if we just give somebody herbs, but we really don't talk about the reason there's a depletion of energy in that organ, not that the organ's bad, it's just that energetically we don't look at the root cause of the problem, then we're in a difficult situation. So when we can look at, for example, grief, and we talk about like what part of this grief is hurting. What is that loss? Is it the loss of a wedding? Is it the loss of a marriage? Is it the loss of, where is that happening? Because if not, I explain to some people, it's like, this is not like allopathic medicine. And I'm kind of generalizing because I love our allopathic doctors, but we have to find a balance between the two. So if I just give somebody an herb and suggest it and they change, but they go back into that same emotional situation, then we're not growing, we're not learning. So we don't, what traditional medicine isn't, is creating a codependency. It's really about educating people, like what are the tools that they have in their own home to be able to bring self-healing? What are the tools they have in their community, in their state, in their country, how to look at things different. Sometimes it includes meditation, sometimes it includes ritual. All of that takes a huge part in healing. And that's exactly both my and Rita's desire, is to have people remember their ancestral medicine and help them grow, because then we really go at the root of health issues and work against disparities of health.
Well, I wanted to, because you started to talk about lungs, and especially because it seems that right now with COVID, that is a big concern. So just looking at someone who is tremendously afraid just to go out because they're afraid of catching it, are there recipes that in the tradition you would say we can actually work to strengthen a certain area so it's not, you're not so susceptible, because we don't know what that person's life is like. We don't know if they went through grief and they may just have, let's say, their protective guards down.
Absolutely. One of the main organ that is impacted by fear is our urinary system, our kidneys, our bladder. And we get a little, I explain this to people, if you see those crazy, years ago, when you saw a crazy movie of a fearful, right, like on a Halloween or something that scared you, or in a movie of trauma, when you always see this reaction. Or maybe you've had family members, when they experience a susto or a shock, they'll actually just urinate their pants. They get so scared. Or I'll pick on Cocker Spaniels, like sometimes the dogs, even the animals, when you're like, ah, and you scare them, they'll pee on the floor because they get frightened. And so when we have problems in reference to our kidneys, in our medicine, the kidney is the vital energy that it gives this essence to all your organs to work. So we do look at things that are real simple, like even in our Mexican tradition, one of the primary drinks is agua de Jamaica. And we see it at a lot of taquerias, a lot of restaurants, Mexican restaurants, where it's Jamaica. which
Is
is
that like what did they call it?
hibiscus. Yeah,
Jicama is that
hibiscus.
hibiscus?
Jicama is another Mexican fruit, but this is actually hibiscus. And what it does is it really gives, nurtures your kidney. It can help heal the kidney, kind of the same way that in America people will go to cranberry. Hibiscus is a beautiful way to do that as well. And I love to do that, especially with kids, because it comes out pink with the red flowers. You can add a little bit of stevia or honey to that, and kids love it. And they'll always ask for it because they like the color and they think, you know, it's something you could get at the store, but we make it quite often for our family, and it's a good way to support that. But also, I think that we're a little, sometimes when we look at medicine, and I'm hoping that on Friday, as we have that introductory talk, I'm really going to focus on each organ, talk about the medicines and how they work. And then the next 2 classes that we have, the 2 weekends, and you can sign up more at the Open Center, is really going to talk about herbs at your access or foods that are there that can help support you even in a time of COVID. I think sometimes we get a little confused as people that are new to herbs, or they'll start going to Google. If we look at COVID, one of the biggest things that's happening right now is that it's a dry cough. If you hear in the meeting, it's not a cough that's typical, where you have phlegm, where you have mucus in the chest. This is a very dry cough. So some great herbs that we've normally used are like oregano, osha, which is chuchupatli in our indigenous tradition. But those are drying herbs. We want to do things like with mullein, or there's a great herb that I love and I'm passionate about. We used it in Mexico when we worked in communities when the H1N1 first came out, and it's borraja or borage. It's actually an herb that came over by the Moors into Mexico. And what we know is actually the word borage actually means to sweat. And what we used it for was as an antibiotic, an antiviral. So using it since now, and we'll talk about it in the classes, is how to make a home tincture, how to, get the flowers and make some medicine, or even sprinkle some of the borage flowers. They're beautiful purple flowers, but you can even sprinkle it on your salad. It's also a great way to include in your soups. You could get a stem in borraja, make some soup, do it freshly on your salads, and it's a very noble, gentle plant that is just amazing. And we can encourage people. I kind of years ago, I think one of the hosts was hosting, his wife was doing a show on cooking and how to include, to make sure people get fiber, to make sure people get these very important elements. But we've forgotten that a whole nother aspect to that is our traditional medicine, is the herbs, is watching our ancestors watch the animals and said, when we see even our dogs today, they get sick, they start eating grass, right? I saw somebody the other day that for people that live in big cities, that they'll even sell you a batch of grass that your animal can like graze on grass on in your home. So we got to be a little bit more creative of how we create access.
Well, I mean, it's great. One of the things that I always worry about is that people will consider this too simple. Is it really working? Is it really that effective? Because when you speak about it, it's almost like I'm taking a tea, but is this really working? But if you do 30 days of that tea every day, maybe 3 times a day, something is happening.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very excellent, great point, Araceli. What it is not, is it's not, it's just like antibiotics, right? If you go to the doctor and they give you one pill, you're not going to be able, you have to do the whole series. You have to do it in a matter of time in order for it to be effective. If you do it with just one treatment, you're not going to have a change in your body. But you're also, when we talk about the emotional part of illness, it has to be a constant work in progress. And so some of it that we can do, like with the Jamaica, it's long-term, every day, every week. How do we build up our system? It takes a long time for us to build a system to actually fall. And, it's to get to a point where we're not healing. And if we think about it negatively, we have to change. So the same way with teas, the same way with emotions, it's a constant work. It's a constant being dedicated to your own health, being dedicated to making those changes. But we do have to have some wisdom because, for example, I had one person show up to my clinic years ago with a kidney stone. And traditionally, when we did not have hospitals, there were ways that people would work on a kidney stone. But now we're really in a wisdom type of community where we know that there are ultrasounds, there are diagnostic procedures that can show exactly where the kidney stone is. And instead of it saying, just take this, or does this person, because when a kidney stone has gone far enough, they get septic and people can die. I actually had an aunt of mine that passed away from a kidney infection. She had a kidney stone and it wasn't, recognized. And that night she went to sleep and she passed away. And so we have to be wise enough to say, yes, can these herbs, one of the things we do for kidney stones, as a matter of fact, is boil celery. And we boil celery and the mucus can coat the ureters. So it helps flush the kidneys, it helps flush the bladder so that we're able to pass those kidney stones. Now, if you had a really big kidney stone, it could present problems. So we really, if somebody knows, and these are people that there are some people, unfortunately, that have a lifetime of kidney stones. That's part of their makeup and their DNA of why they built kidney stones. It's part of their emotions. So doing something proactive like the boiling of celery and drinking that a couple of times a week would help prevent the buildup. But in the moment of crisis, we really have to go to our allopathic brothers and sisters, all those doctors that started with the same intent. So it's really about finding that balance. Both of them work, but like anything, it's long-term. Right. And I'll give you another example. In our country right now, we're having to adapt to be at home. We're having to adapt to wear masks. And it's crucial. But we also know that, like, if you do it just once, it's going to be uncomfortable. If you do it over, I think the traditional sayings are, if you do it for 14 days or more, it just becomes habit. You don't leave your car without your mask on. And this is exactly part of traditional medicine too. Is like, how do we build the habit into what we're consuming, what we're eating, what we're drinking, what we're seeing, our own passion of what's happening in our communities. Sometimes even our own media can be toxic to the way that we think. Sometimes watching, especially now that everybody's watching a lot of Netflix and movies and things like, what's the next thing? Are those things that we're imparting into our lives positive? Are they producing, like, making you laugh, even if it's a comedy? Like, that's great medicine. Rita, my colleague, is known, and maybe in one of these classes, we'll do some risa terapia. That's one of her things she's known famously. But we look even at something in allopathic,
Laughter
like therapy.
therapy.
Adams, yeah, laugh therapy, risa terapia. It boosts serotonin in your brain. It boosts your dopamine so that you can change the frequency of your mind. So those are all parts of traditional ways of healing.
Who do you see that are professionals that are getting interested, that already have a practice and work? I don't know if they're nurses or that are trying to learn this kind of work. Why?
I see, I'm going to bring up a great colleague of mine, actually, because of the Open Center, and you may have met her, Selma Skroka. She's a MD out of Minnesota, and she did come to Mexico with your trip, with the Open Center, and she's studied with us and continues her practice. And one of the things that was really noble about what she said after she did this is that in her practice in Minnesota, she was treating a lot of people that were from Latin America, from Mexico, from the Southwest. And she recognized that for her to be a better provider, she really needed to learn about their traditional practices, their traditional ways, because then you could really have a dialogue. And I think it's a beautiful way. And we often get stuck because some people might say, and I've heard elders, concerned because you're teaching this woman who is not of color our traditional medicine. And we really have to recognize every single human being comes from a community. Their ancestors at some point in their life lived off the land. Their medicines came from the land the way ours did. And however you are called, Creator is an amazing energy that brings people to come together to camaraderie. And I think it's in that. And where does your heart come from? How do you inspire others? How is your heart inspired? So when you see people that will honor and respect those traditions, it's about relationships. So a lot of times when I'm working in patients and community, I said, please tell your doctor what I've suggested. It's not a secret anymore. It's not something you have to hold back. But also, please, what I've shared with you, share with others, because somebody else will need to find this medicine at some point. They'll need to find these traditions, even if it's just to ground them in who they are. And we all have that divine right to heal.
Fantastic. Well, one of the first things you're going to be doing is on the Friday night, you're going to be doing a cacao ceremony, which is for most of us a chocolate ceremony, and it sounds, it's fun. It's the idea. But just to give you a little tidbit of information from my perspective as far as chocolate in Central America. As a child, I thought I never really knew about chocolate, and I didn't really get the impression that Latin America was a big chocolate fan. I come to the United States and it's like chocolate, chocolate, chocolate everywhere is chocolate. I'm like, I don't understand. Now, in Latin countries, I'm beginning to see something. Chocolate is associated more with the indigenous people. And indigenous people are the poorest of the people. And they carry the tradition, and cacao seems to be something sacred. I need to understand more about why is it sacred. One of the best things that I think other countries can do is when they pay for fair trade, because they are supporting native people who are actually producing it themselves and selling it. So I want to hear a bit more about that.
Such an excellent point again, Araceli. When I left, my background is in science. By degree, I'm a mathematician, and I studied art and mathematics. And my brain originally in our education system was about going to college, and you have your 2.5 kids and have your white picket fence, and then you're happy. And that's not necessarily the case. And we found out, on the contrary, it's really going within. It's doing the work within your deep self. And I say that because after several years of working here in this country, and when I decided, both for my own health and for the health of my community, that I was going to move to Mexico, one of the things that I really do believe is, you're right, there is, when we talk about poverty, we talk about income and dollars, and that people are impoverished. And I did see that a lot working in different countries. But what I see more, that was actually even more frightening, is that, especially in our communities, is that there's a poverty of the soul that is deeper than the poverty. So you're right that in a lot of countries, it's the indigenous people that are more economically insufficient, but they have this amazing resiliency, this amazing love for life. There's so many people in our country that want to learn about a contemplative lifestyle. And I'm like, this is what our indigenous communities do on instinct, what they're taught. I remember in this great town that we worked on, Rita's hometown, it's in Matachi, Mexico. I sat in awe watching a child play on a tree for 4 or 5 hours, and thought about all my nieces and nephew and my family who are sometimes stuck to a video game, right? They never get the ability to play with trees and leaves and see their grains and to feel it. And
they're being nurtured back by nature by doing that.
Exactly. So as we pull that into cacao, what we're really hoping, and in the ceremony before we do that, we're going to talk and give people some time to create their own altar so that they're able to expand within their culture, their beliefs, and where they are now. Spirituality is a growth. So we meet people where they're at. So we're going to have people incorporate their feelings, but we're really going to talk about the brilliance and indigenous science of cacao. Most people are not aware that the reason why it supports the body is because it's medicine, right? Cacao traditionally is not the sweet chocolate that we have here, but it's something that we do use. There's a great example, and I'll expand a little bit more, but we even know, and this is to the extreme, I kind of laugh because even women, right, when they're having PMS or going through, they're like, I crave that chocolate. What we know and let me speak a little bit about that first so that we'll understand. When women are shedding and having their periods, one elder explained to me it's a way to release all those emotions, to release not just the physical shedding of the womb, but actually the shedding of all the crap we dealt with this past month. It's the being able to release that energy. And so when we release energy, there's a depletion of energy in our body, and then we need to boost it up. And this is exactly why people crave chocolate, because what we know is just the smell of chocolate, the smell of cacao, it builds endorphins in your mind. There was a study done here at the University of New Mexico that just the smell and that aromatherapy, it was equivalent to the people that were actually taking heroin. That
Wow.
one of the ways that they could treat people that were dealing with heroin addiction and to boost the dopamine was to give them the essential oil of cacao. So when they felt like they needed to take some of their drugs for whatever, most people that for me deal with addictions, it's because there's an emotional imbalance. So you can't just take away the addiction. You have to say, how do we work with the mind? And having the essence of cacao is a perfect way to allow people the tools to say, at this point in my life, or at this point in this day, I need something more. And by smelling some cacao, it gives somebody a tool, an ancestral indigenous medicine that can be shared. So there's a lot of, another great time that we use cacao is when somebody has started their contractions, their birth, the same way that we do on their menstruation. When they're in the middle of the birth, we'll actually have people eat cacao because it's so relaxing and it helps them dilate so they're able to give birth. So there's so many wisdom about cacao, and we automatically think about it as a chocolate bar, but there's a good reason that most people, when they are really craving chocolate, they're really stressed. They're really trying to figure out what's happening in their life, and they just get into this, I need a chocolate fix. And that's why. So when that's kind of the science a little bit, and we'll talk about it more, and how widespread it is, even across the Americas, that it was here in Chaco Canyon, was one of the biggest finds of cacao, sacred cacao containers in New Mexico. And it was actually buried around two Toltec indigenous people that were buried fully plumed with their feathers. And they were buried inside Chaco Canyon with these amazing cacao. And it was worth more, right? Because that is not only how they traded, but it was the value of what cacao brought to life. So, I'm excited. This is our very first time of bringing this ceremony. But I also think it's at a critical point in our country where people need to know how to bring that resilience, how to help people out of depression, how to surrender. We have a great word in Spanish. When somebody would get married, part of their traditional ceremony was an entrega. So one of the community members would sing, and they would have the male and the male's family and the women, whatever the partners are, and they would sing a song. So they would say, and it was written just for that community. And this is, Tonita Gonzales and her family is from here, and together they become a family with the Montoya family and their traditions and their land. And it talks about all of their history. But entrega is a great word because it means the giving. So in our spiritual practice, it's like, how do we say, I have somebody that's sick, I have an illness, y te voy a entregarlo. I'm going to give it to Creator. I'm going to give it to the heavenly, because if I hold on to it, then it becomes part of my being. And part of healing, especially, and this is something we do sacredly in a duelo, in grief, as a partera de alma, when I'm helping and supporting a family to give their loved one to Creator, to allow them to go into however they call that divine light. Vamos a entregarlo. We're going to give them away, because it's a sacred way of saying they're part of their own soul. They're not, even though they love them, they're part of me. They're not of me. They have their own journey, and we support people and believe in people in where their path takes them. But it's some very deep spiritual work to say, I surrender that. And it's passion. It's what we need to do to support community.
Well, one of the best things that I like about this day is going to be evening, that is, how you're asking basically the participants to be part of an actual ceremony, even though it's online, to set up an altar, to place several types of objects on it. Basically, you get in front of the screen, I'm assuming, and you have something in front of you. So it can be also an energetic, I believe anyway, an energetic connection between whomever is online with you. So you can actually go through an actual ceremony. I mean, you'll have things like candles and fruits and vegetables, of course, the cacao, chocolate, glass of water, and so on. But the list is there. But I really like the image of understanding that that's possible no matter where you are, if you're in person or not. And I just want to get that across, because most people may think that this is not possible because kurandarismo is something that you experience in ritual form only in person.
Yeah.
And therefore, yeah.
There is a medicine, it's a different type of medicine that comes with touch and comes with hugging each other. And, you know, that is a sacred part of medicine. And it's something that even in this ceremony, if you have a child, like when you're done and you know you need a hug, or you're in quarantine with somebody, then you can do that. But there's also a wonderful way that you can literally just hold and hug yourself as well, right, in these ceremonies. And what we want to do is share the tools so that people can do that, and be able to come together, be able to come with their own beliefs, their own traditions. And why is that important? Is that, like with any other spiritual practice, sometimes we get our view that prayer has to look this way, it has to be this way. And that's just, in as multicultural as we are in our communities, we know that if we believe, and most Indigenous teachings will say that everybody is part of a gift, from the bugs to their winged brothers and sisters, the four-legged, everybody is a gift of the divine. And that includes, of course, every single human. And because we've grown up in different environments, we have to bring in the nature of where there are. Years ago, when we started having a lot of trauma in our communities and mass shootings, I worked with the colleagues of us here in Albuquerque and said, how do we allow, there's such an interest in young people to find out about their roots, because many of us were denied that education growing up. And what we did is we actually, here in Albuquerque, we had what are called love and light ceremonies. And we created a community altar. Granted, what we'll do on that day, it's virtual, it'll be in your home. But what we do is we say anything of any belief or anything you know that needs prayer, how do we pull that together? And so some people would put, you know, their beads from their grandmother, a rosary, pictures, a ring, whatever spiritual practice, you know, whether it was Indigenous, whether it was Christian, any spiritual practice, show up and put what you need to be on that altar. And we were in a massive circles, and we'd usually, you know, get hundreds of people that would show up just to say, I'm here holding you. I'm here accepting you for who you are, where you are, and just hold them in that moment. And so we're really hoping that this ceremony that we do, it's a collective prayer where we can all hold each other and bring healing in a very sacred way, but to let people that they're not alone, to let people show up with their own traditions, to let people find joy in who they are. And that wisdom, allow people to do that and sing with us and share your songs and come together in some healing, because we think, and unfortunately have been taught sometimes, that you have to go to a doctor, you have to go to a healer, you have to go to a priest, people that are dedicated. And I love that people have spiritual backgrounds in different areas, but the truth is we are all spiritual beings. I had a call a few weeks ago from a woman who has cancer, and she was from down south, and her husband said, I'm going to bring her up. I want you to see her. And we are in a time of COVID and quarantine as well. And very tearfully, she says, I gave her suggestions to deal with, talked about emotions, talked to her for a long time. And she said to me, Señora, I think that, and she said in Spanish, what I need is just for you to have your divine hands hold my head. And I would say to her and to anybody, anybody listening, is tus manos, your hands are just as divine as mine. And what I would ask you to do is to take those hands to where she has the cancer and just beam light and love from there. And we forget that it's our hands that bring healing. When we prepare our meals, when we prepare our herbs, when we hold the cacao, we do not have the hands. We do not have to create a codependency to think it's only our hands. Part of teaching indigenous traditional medicine is to empower people to find out about their own roots, about their own ancestors, and to bring that love and energy through their own healing hands.
Well, we have about, I think maybe about 5 minutes left, but I just wanted to touch, you will be holding 2 different classes on 2 different weekends, and one of them is healing with traditional indigenous foods, which you were telling me has a lot to do with basically juicing and how to work with emotions and how to work with the organs of the body, which I thought was pretty interesting because I really didn't think about that. We all think about juicing, it's going all over the body, but not particularly, it's pinpointing really more about what we're doing with organs. It's just something about that, if you could tell me more about that.
You know, it's great when in a lot of Latin American countries, specifically in Mexico, if you're going to go for a walk, you see all these signs and of jugoterapia, which is juice therapy. And when we see juicing in the US, we think of it as like a diet or a way to get nutrients, but we don't actually always think of it as medicine. And I'll give you an example. In our country, we're inundated with people on stomach medication like Prilosec, all these medications to take down the acid indigestion, right? And what we know on the emotional side of that is that as we are in this country of many worries right now, is when there is worry, it depletes that system. So one simple thing that we do in ayunas, like before you make your meal and in the evenings, is that you juice carrots and a small potato. And you do this in before, because what we know is it actually, the beta carotene and the starches heal the esophagus. It heals, there's a little flap that when your stomach acids go up, it becomes swollen and it allows more acids to go up the esophagus. So what this one recipe does is it begins to neutralize the inflammation, and it helps coat and heal the scarring that has happened in the esophagus. Now, this isn't, like we talked about earlier, an overnight cure, but I have worked with many patients that have been able to come off of any type of antacid and medication just by doing this. It takes some dedication, and to be honest, maybe about a month, but you'll be able to free yourself from the chemicals of the medication that you had to take before.
That sounds fantastic. Just because, you know, that whole thing with Zantac that happened just a little while ago, where they had to take it off the market and people were probably popping it like candy, and it was causing cancer. The other class you're going to have, which I really love, is the one about creating remedies. So you'll be teaching a variety of recipes that could be poultices, or I don't know, if you could give me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we're going to share with you a variety of herbs, and we're hoping that maybe if somebody sees an herb or a flower and they see it in their grocery store, bring it. If it was something that your ancestors used, bring that example, and we'll talk about it during this class. But we're not only going to talk about a great way of making medicine is what we do, especially in indigenous communities, because you can use very little plant and make medicine, and that's in a tincture form. But we're going to talk about maybe we grind it and we use it in pills. We're going to talk about a compress, or we call it cantaplasma, where you lay down the leaves of the plant on your body. Something as simple that I like to teach people a lot is, many people don't recognize that lettuce is anti-inflammatory. So a lot of times that people that have arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis and they have uric acid, it's cooling. So we'll actually can rub it around the hands, sleep with that. Sometimes we'll say even get the potatoes, get some gauze and sleep with it, or put literally a head of lettuce in the tub. Now, we in New Mexico have lots of farmers that grow lettuce. So I'll say, you know, go to the farmers. Usually they throw away the first few leaves and take a bath with the lettuce. So
New York delis.
Yeah, exactly. And we want to teach everybody some of these simple remedies that they can do at home, and also learn from people, because as we all share together as community, we'll let you know. And I always, when I did a class a few years ago here in New Mexico, there was an elder from northern New Mexico. It talked about an herb called chimaha. And he would say they would gather it only during Holy Week, usually around the churches only. And what it is it is in the family celery. He's like, we always put it in our potato salad, and it's medicine gathered during those weeks. And it's a wonderful herb that I didn't know about. And now, you know, I'm happy to know about it. But those are the great wisdoms that we hope that everybody gets to learn and share.
Fantastic. Now, you're going to be having a free introductory evening on Friday night, this Friday night, July 24th at 6:30. So please tune into that, because Tonita will be talking more about the upcoming classes. And then you'll also have the Healing Cacao ceremony that evening. We'll be having on, you can definitely look on our website. So what will also be aware of that, and this is my understanding, that you'll be able to participate, for example, in making of the recipes. For example, you can be in your kitchen, you can have everything like laid out, and you'll be able to walk people through certain things. You'll also give them more information, so resources and books that they can order that you yourself have written, so that they can have really a large, extensive information about all the recipes that you have put into practice, which is kind of unusual, because a lot of this information is not really written down. And there'll be some combo prices for people who decide to do this on a big scale there. So,
Yeah.
so if you have any information, or you're having any trouble, bad day on website or something, send me an email and we will fix it for you at araceli@opencenter.org, which is ARACELY @opencenter.org. And thank you so much, Tonita. You were fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you guys all at the free introduction class. I encourage you to be there, because we're going to really talk about the emotions and how they impact the organs. So we're all prepared to do the classes that come up, and to do that together in a sacred way. And for the classes, make sure that you bring an herb that you like, or herb that somebody talked about, or even bring along your favorite fruit or vegetable or grain. And we'll come together to talk about how this impacts our body. But I wish you all the best, and happy healing, and continue remembering that healing is mind, body, and spirit, and we have to do it collaboratively. For me, kurandarismo is restorative justice, and it's how we all come together to heal. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.